Under a video about China's wonder material breakthroughs, one comment kept climbing past the others. Pair this up with hemp, and you're really onto something. Another commenter put it flatter. Cannabis gives even better fiber, easier to extract than almost anything else out there. People keep asking why a stronger, thirstier alternative to cotton isn't already hanging in every closet. It tried. Twice. In 2 different countries. Then it got made illegal both times. Cotton built the modern wardrobe, and it did it at a cost most labels never print on the tag. Growing enough cotton fiber for roughly 1 t-shirt and 1 pair of jeans, close to a kilogram, can take somewhere near 10,000 liters of water by most standard estimates. And in some growing regions, the real figure climbs past 20,000. Even the more conservative industry studies, using efficient modern drip irrigation, still land around 8,000 to 9,000 liters per kilogram. And the International Cotton Advisory Committee has separately put the global average closer to 8,900 liters. Zoom out, and cotton alone accounts for something like a quarter of all the insecticides sold on the planet, and roughly 11% of total global pesticide sales, despite covering only about 2.4% of the world's farmland. Zoom out further, and you land on the Aral Sea, once one of the 4 largest lakes on Earth, drained down to roughly a tenth of its original volume, largely because its feeder rivers were diverted for decades to flood cotton fields across Central Asia. None of this is a rounding error buried in a footnote. Cotton farming is also heavily concentrated in countries already under serious water stress, including parts of India, Pakistan, China, and the American Southwest, which means the crop keeps getting planted precisely where fresh water can least afford to be spared. It is the baseline cost of the fashion industry's default crop, and it has been quietly priced into every basic t-shirt for 100 years, without most buyers ever noticing. There was a plant growing right next to those cotton fields the entire time that solved nearly every one of those problems, and it wasn't a lab discovery. It was hemp, the same plant sailors used to rig ships and weave sailcloth centuries before anyone patented a synthetic fiber. Multiple independent studies put hemp's water need for 1 kilogram of usable fiber somewhere between roughly 300 and 2,500 liters, against cotton's 8,000 to 20,000, depending on the growing method and region studied. A widely cited 2015 Stockholm Environment Institute comparison put raw cotton fiber at around 19,758 liters per kilogram, against roughly 2,401 liters for hemp, a rough 4 to 1 gap, even under a conservative reading. Hemp also thrives on rainfall instead of heavy irrigation, matures in about 4 months instead of a full growing season, and needs next to no pesticides because the plant naturally repels most insects and fungi on its own. Per hectare, hemp regularly outproduces cotton on raw fiber yield, in some industry estimates by more than double, and it pulls an estimated 22 to 44 tons of carbon dioxide out of the air per hectare over a growing cycle. More than most mature forests manage in the same span. Fabric woven from it is also commonly reported to hold up for decades of regular wear rather than years, largely thanks to its high tensile strength and resistance to repeated washing. Hemp can also be grown on the same plot for consecutive seasons without depleting the soil the way continuous cotton monoculture does, and leftover leaves and stalk material can be plowed straight back into the field as natural fertilizer instead of trucked away as waste. This wasn't some hidden breakthrough waiting to be discovered in a lab. It was sitting in plain sight the entire time cotton was quietly draining rivers dry across 3 continents. So if the plant was already there, cheaper on water, cheaper on chemicals, and higher yielding per acre, why did cotton win so completely for 100 years? Because hemp didn't lose in the field. It lost in 2 separate governments, on opposite sides of the planet, within decades of each other. In 1937, the United States passed the Marijuana Tax Act. On paper, it wasn't technically a ban. It was a maze of licenses, tax stamps, and paperwork wrapped around anything botanically related to cannabis, hemp included, even though industrial hemp carries next to none of the psychoactive compound that made lawmakers nervous. Getting a license to grow it legally required a farmer to already be growing it, and getting the tax stamp required the license. A bureaucratic loop that quietly strangled the crop without a single line of the law ever using the word ban. Historians still argue over how much of that outcome was deliberate industrial self-interest, since the DuPont family had just patented nylon and timber barons had reason to fear a cheap paper pulp substitute undercutting their business, And how much was simple bureaucratic overreach that nobody fully steered on purpose? DuPont itself has always disputed any direct connection, pointing out its real competition at the time was silk and rayon, not hemp. Recent historical research has also pushed back on the popular version of this story, arguing that the first U.S. Commissioner of Narcotics gets cast as more of a mastermind than the record actually supports, and that he initially resisted federal marijuana prohibition on practical grounds before shifting position under pressure from state officials higher up the chain. That correction matters because it means the real story is messier than either a clean conspiracy or a clean accident. And it's worth treating the popular industrial sabotage version as a widely repeated theory rather than a settled fact. What isn't disputed is the outcome on the ground. By 1970, hemp was formally folded into Schedule I alongside recreational marijuana, and growing it commercially required a federal permit that was almost never granted for the rest of the century. Here's the part almost nobody expects going in. China did roughly the same thing to itself, on its own separate timeline. Hemp had been cultivated there for thousands of years, used for rope, paper, and cloth long before it ever reached Europe by trade routes. Then, in 1985, after China joined a United Nations Convention on Psychotropic Substances, the country banned hemp cultivation outright, for essentially the same underlying reason the United States had gutted its own industry decades earlier. Nobody in either government wanted the political headache of policing the line between a fiber crop and a drug crop at scale, so the fiber crop got sacrificed to make the drug policy simpler to enforce. China's ban held for a full 25 years, roughly the same order of magnitude as the American freeze-out, and it wasn't quietly reversed by accident either. It took a deliberate policy shift in 2010 to open cultivation back up, by which point an entire generation of Chinese farmers had grown up with no living memory of hemp as a normal crop at all. Two countries, two completely different legal systems, and the same ancient plant erased from working farmland for almost identical reasons, decades apart from each other. Even where the law eventually allowed hemp back in, the plant still had a genuine manufacturing problem, the same kind of problem that once made bamboo look unusable for serious construction. Hemp's usable fiber sits wrapped tightly around a woody core called the hurd, and separating the two cleanly, at high quality, and at real industrial scale, is genuinely difficult. The process is called decortication, and for most of the 20th century, it barely existed outside small artisanal workshops, or a handful of countries overseas. In the United States, that finally changed when a company called I&D Hemp built the country's first large-scale hemp decortication and fiber processing plant in the small town of Fort Benton, Montana, a facility capable of running roughly 5 tons of raw stalks through its lines every hour. The plant runs on machinery imported from La Roche, a French fiber specialist, because after 80 years of federal prohibition, American manufacturers simply didn't have the domestic engineering expertise left to build that equipment themselves. So the very first large hemp fiber line built on American soil in nearly a century still had to be shipped in from a country that never stopped doing this work. The project created dozens of jobs in a town of around 2,500 people, and it now supports tens of thousands of acres of hemp production across the surrounding Montana region, turning raw stalks into 2 distinct products: the outer bast fiber, clean and consistent enough for mills to actually spin into fabric, and the leftover woody hurd, which gets sold separately into insulation, animal bedding, and construction blocks. That construction angle is the same one that made engineered bamboo worth a video in the first place, and hemp is quietly working its way into that market too, through a building material called hempcrete. China's comeback, by contrast, was faster and far more deliberate. Cultivation became legal again there in 2010, and the industry didn't just quietly recover the way it did in America. It was engineered from the top down to dominate the category. China is now believed to grow somewhere between a third and half of the entire world's hemp fiber supply, concentrated mostly in Heilongjiang province in the north and Yunnan province in the south, exporting the overwhelming majority of what it produces, with Chinese hemp fiber sales reported at roughly $1.2 billion as early as 2018 alone. This isn't an accident of climate or geography. China's own state planning documents lay out a target of roughly 3.2 million acres of fiber hemp under cultivation by 2030, explicitly framed as part of a strategy to displace higher emission materials like cotton and help the country hit its stated climate and net zero targets. Industry researchers have described this as China positioning itself to become a hemp fiber superpower, in the same deliberate way it built dominance in solar panels or batteries. Identify a material the rest of the world underinvests in, then outscale everyone else on infrastructure until the price gap closes on its own. In other words, the country named in that video title isn't stumbling into a hemp fabric someday by accident. It has a published, government-backed plan to become the supplier the rest of the global textile industry quietly depends on, the same way it already supplies the majority of the world's hemp seed as well. If your instinct at this point is that every breakthrough story sounds revolutionary, right up until it needs mass production, that skepticism is fair, and it's the same objection people raised about engineered bamboo before real buildings and bridges started standing on it. The difference with hemp is that the mass production question isn't hypothetical anymore. Fort Benton is already running tons of stalks through its lines every single hour. China already has a published multi-year acreage target, measured in the millions. And France never stopped producing at commercial scale in the first place. None of these three examples are pilot projects waiting on a press release. They're existing supply chains, shipping existing fiber into existing fabric mills right now. The proof isn't a lab prototype waiting for funding. It's three separate supply chains already operating today, at different sizes for different reasons, which is a harder thing to fake than a single flashy demo video. The rest of the world is only now catching up to a plant that never fully left France, which kept a small but continuous hemp industry running through the entire American freeze-out, and today still supplies well over half of Europe's total hemp fiber output. The United States finally caught up in 2018, when a new farm bill legalized low-THC industrial hemp nationwide, ending an 80-year federal freeze with a single signature. Fashion moved fast once that legal door reopened. Levi's released its first hemp denim collection in 2019, then expanded to a well-thread line, blending in more than half hemp fiber by 2021. Patagonia now runs an entire workwear collection, blending hemp with organic cotton. Stella McCartney has folded hemp into multiple lines over the years, and hemp fabric has quietly reached suppliers connected to names like Ralph Lauren and Calvin Klein through specialist hemp textile mills. Even automakers have quietly gotten involved, with hemp-based textiles turning up in interior trim from manufacturers like Volkswagen and Ford. And specialist hemp mills report their fabric has even been used to build entire costume lines for major film productions. This isn't a fringe fiber confined to niche eco-brands anymore. It is already hanging on real racks in real stores, sitting in real car interiors, decades after Schedule 1 tried to guarantee it never would get there. The scale behind this shift is hard to dismiss as a passing trend. The global industrial hemp market was worth an estimated $4 billion in 2021 and is projected by multiple industry analysts to climb past $18 billion by 2027, growing at roughly 15 to 17% a year, with the textile segment already accounting for more than 40% of that total revenue. 1 hectare of hemp can produce roughly as much usable pulp as 4 hectares of mature trees, without the decades of waiting for a forest to regrow. Raw hemp fiber currently trades somewhere in the range of 80 cents to $1.50 per pound depending on quality, and investment in North American processing capacity alone has already surpassed $200 million as mills race to catch up with demand, with Europe's dedicated hemp textile market alone estimated at several hundred million euros on top of that. And in one of the stranger footnotes in the plant's long history, hemp was deliberately planted around Chernobyl in the 1990s because researchers found it unusually effective at pulling heavy metals and radioactive contamination out of poisoned soil, part of a broader field of research called phytoremediation, with field tests in some contaminated plots showing measurable reductions in soil radiation levels. This is a plant that 2 separate governments once treated as a threat serious enough to criminalize, quietly doing environmental cleanup work at the site of one of the worst nuclear disasters on record. None of this makes hemp a flawless drop-in replacement for cotton, and it's worth being honest about where it still genuinely falls short. Decades of prohibition gutted processing expertise everywhere outside a handful of countries, which is exactly why American producers are still importing French decortication machinery instead of building their own equipment domestically. Hemp fiber is also naturally coarser straight off the stalk than cotton, So most current fabric blends it with cotton or other fibers for softness and drape rather than using pure hemp alone, and production costs today still run meaningfully higher than cotton, by some industry estimates 30 to 50% higher, simply because the supply chain hasn't scaled yet the way cotton's has over a century. The water savings figures also genuinely vary by study and by region, with some researchers landing at roughly half the water use, and others closer to 90 or 95% less. So any single dramatic number thrown around online deserves a healthy dose of skepticism rather than being repeated as settled fact. There's also the blunt commercial reality that consumers still associate the plant with its psychoactive cousin, which slows adoption, regardless of what the THC label actually says. And regulatory paperwork in some regions still moves slower than the agronomy it's supposed to be governing. The underlying plant science checks out, and the water and land use advantages are real under almost every version of the numbers researchers have published. Rebuilding the infrastructure to match cotton's century-long head start is still happening one processing plant and one government 5-year plan at a time, not all at once. A plant once outlawed on 2 continents is quietly returning. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next.